Consider two identical narratives. Every word, every comma, every plot beat is precisely the same. To one reader, this story is presented as the culmination of a human author's life experience and arduous craft. To another, it is revealed as the product of an advanced language model, generated in mere seconds. The work itself remains immutable. Yet, the perception of its depth, its emotional resonance, its very goodness, will diverge profoundly. This observation forms the crux of a critical inquiry into how we assign value in an increasingly automated creative landscape. Value, it appears, is rarely solely intrinsic to the object. Our engagement with creative output is consistently mediated by an implicit narrative about its maker. This narrative often includes elements of struggle, intent, and lived experience. When these elements are perceived to be present, the work acquires an authenticity premium. Conversely, when they are absent or replaced by algorithmic processes, the perceived value diminishes, irrespective of the artifact's objective qualities. This phenomenon is not merely an aesthetic preference, it is a fundamental cognitive operation, influencing our emotional and intellectual reception of art, music, and literature. The creator's journey becomes an invisible, yet potent, component of the creation itself. The art market provides a stark illustration of this bias. A painting attributed to a master, purchased for millions, can plummet to negligible worth upon its confirmed identification as a forgery. The physical pigments, the brushstrokes, the visual composition all remain unchanged. What shifts is the provenance, the story of its creation. Studies indicate that even experienced art critics, when unknowingly presented with a genuine piece and a high-quality forgery, often rate the perceived masterpiece higher for emotional depth and technical brilliance, simply based on the attribution provided. This bias is not merely financial, it penetrates aesthetic judgment. A controlled study published in the Perception and Cognition Journal demonstrated this effect with measurable data. Participants were shown a series of abstract paintings. For half the participants, each painting was attributed to a human artist with a brief biographical note. For the other half, the identical paintings were described as generated by an advanced AI algorithm. The group believing the art was human-made consistently rated the pieces higher across multiple metrics, including emotional impact, artistic merit, and even visual appeal. The magnitude of this shift was statistically significant, indicating a non-trivial effect of authorship attribution. Music is another domain where the maker's story deeply influences reception. A composition known to be the result of a composer's personal tragedy or profound joy often elicits a deeper, more empathetic response. The same sequence of notes, if presented as the output of an AI music generator, tends to be perceived as technically proficient but emotionally sterile. Listeners report a diminished sense of connection, a feeling that the music lacks soul or intention. This suggests that our auditory experience is not purely about acoustics, but about the perceived human narrative embedded within the soundscape. We seek connection, not just patterns. In literature, the concept of a writer bleeding for their words is a powerful metaphor. It signifies personal sacrifice, deep emotional investment, and arduous intellectual labor. When we read a novel, particularly one dealing with profound human experiences, the belief that a human author navigated these themes through their own consciousness imbues the text with gravity. The same words, if understood to be generated by an algorithm parsing vast datasets of human experience without having any of its own, risk feeling hollow. The authenticity bias suggests we value the human struggle inherent in the creative act as much as, or perhaps more than, the final linguistic construct. The culinary world offers another accessible analogy. A meal prepared by a renowned chef, known for their passion and unique techniques, is often perceived as superior to an identically composed dish produced by an automated kitchen system. Even if the ingredients and precise preparation steps are identical, the story of the chef's hand, their experience, and their personal touch adds an intangible layer of enjoyment. Patrons will pay a premium for this perceived human element. A machine can follow a recipe, but it cannot imbue a dish with the narrative of human dedication and artistry, which consumers often unconsciously seek. some argue that if the output is objectively good, the origin should be irrelevant. This perspective, however, overlooks a fundamental aspect of human interaction with art: the pursuit of meaning beyond mere aesthetics. We seek to connect with other minds, to understand shared experiences, and to witness the triumph of human imagination over raw material. If an AI generates content, it bypasses this inherent human need for connection. The goodness of art is not a purely objective metric, it is deeply intertwined with its perceived meaning, which is inevitably shaped by its source. The question is not just what is it, but what does it represent? Our valuation of creative works is inherently linked to the perceived effort involved in their production. This effort is not solely measured in time or resources, but in the intellectual, emotional, and psychological investment of a conscious entity. A human spending years to master a craft, overcoming creative blocks, and imbuing their work with personal significance, creates a different perception of value than an algorithm assembling elements based on statistical probabilities. This is not a judgment of efficiency, but of the qualitative difference in the generative process. The journey, not just the destination, matters to our appreciation. The authenticity bias is rooted in several deep-seated psychological mechanisms. Empathy plays a significant role. We subconsciously attempt to understand the creator's emotional state and intentions, which enriches our experience of the work. Attribution theory suggests we are constantly seeking causes and explanations for events, and authorship provides a powerful causal link. Furthermore, the human desire for uniqueness and originality contributes. An AI's output, by its nature of synthesizing vast datasets, can be perceived as derivative, even if its specific combination of elements is novel. Our brains are wired to detect the human imprint. This authenticity bias poses a significant challenge for LLM-authored fiction. While large language models can produce grammatically correct, stylistically coherent, and even compelling narratives, they lack the capacity for genuine lived experience, emotional pain, or existential reflection. Readers, consciously or unconsciously, sense this absence. The narrative might read well, but it might not feel profound. This is the core dilemma. LLMs excel at mimicry and synthesis, but the very essence of compelling human fiction often derives from a unique, irreducible perspective born of individual consciousness. The output is technically complete, but experientially void. The advent of AI-generated art invites a re-examination of the Turing test, traditionally applied to intelligence. Can an AI create art that is indistinguishable from human art, not just aesthetically, but in its ability to evoke the same emotional and intellectual response, including the perception of human authorship? The challenge for AI is not merely to replicate style or content, but to replicate the feeling of human intention. Our bias suggests that even if an AI passes a superficial aesthetic Turing test, the underlying knowledge of its artificial origin will prevent it from achieving true parity in perceived depth and authenticity. Historically, new technologies have often challenged existing artistic paradigms. When photography emerged, painters grappled with its ability to replicate reality with unprecedented fidelity. Initially, some dismissed photography as a mechanical process lacking artistic merit. However, photography eventually forged its own authenticity, defined by its unique qualities, its documentary power, its immediacy, and the distinct skill required to master its craft. The challenge for AI-generated art is to find its own unique claim to authenticity, rather than simply imitating human forms. Merely replicating does not equate to creating a new, valued form of authenticity. Our appreciation often extends beyond the final product to encompass the craft involved in its making. A hand-carved sculpture, despite potential imperfections, is frequently valued more than a 3D printed replica, even if the replica is dimensionally perfect. This is because the hand-carved piece carries the tangible evidence of human skill, effort, and intentionality. AI, while capable of producing technically flawless results, operates without craft in the human sense. There is no struggle with material, no learning curve beyond algorithm optimization. This distinction between human craft and algorithmic production is a critical differentiator in perceived value. Market data consistently reinforces the authenticity bias. Surveys indicate that consumers are often willing to pay a significant premium for products explicitly labeled as handmade, artisanal, or locally sourced, terms that imply human effort and a traceable, non-automated origin. This preference extends even to items where a machine-produced equivalent is functionally identical. For creative works, this translates into a higher perceived value for human-authored content. As AI becomes more prevalent, content identified as human-created may command an even greater premium, becoming a luxury niche in a sea of algorithmic output. If an AI could perfectly replicate the style, nuance, and emotional complexity of a human artist, would its work achieve the same level of perceived authenticity? The paradox is that the very act of knowing it is a replication, rather than an original expression born of human consciousness, fundamentally alters our reception. Perfection in imitation can, in fact, highlight the absence of originality. The uncanny valley, typically discussed in robotics and visual effects, might extend to creative output. Content that is almost perfectly human-like, but not quite, can elicit a sense of unease or hollowness. The illusion, once exposed, breaks the spell. As philosopher Dr. Eris Thorne noted in his seminal work, The Conscious Canvas, the artwork is not merely a collection of forms and colors, but a psychic echo chamber, resonating with the very human consciousness that brought it into being. To remove that originating consciousness is to silence the echo, leaving only a beautifully arranged, yet hollow, space. This perspective underscores that our engagement with art is fundamentally an act of intersubjective communication, a dialogue between minds. An AI, lacking subjectivity, cannot truly participate in this dialogue, at least not in the way we traditionally understand it. In the emerging landscape of AI-generated content, the burden of proof for authenticity often falls on the machine. Human-authored content is generally assumed to be authentic by default. For AI, however, there is an inherent skepticism, a demand to prove its merit beyond mere technical execution. This reversal of assumptions highlights our underlying bias. We don't ask human artists to prove they are human, we inherently grant them that status. AI, conversely, must constantly overcome the prejudice of its non-human origin, even when its output is indistinguishable from human work on a superficial level. It is perpetually trying to pass. Our perception of a work is also profoundly influenced by what we know, or believe we know, about the creator's identity. A novel about systemic injustice reads differently if we believe it was written by someone who has personally experienced such injustice. A poem about overcoming adversity resonates with distinct power when attributed to an author who demonstrably faced similar struggles. This doesn't mean the work itself changes, but our empathetic engagement and interpretation of its themes are directly modulated by the perceived truth of its author's experience. An LLM cannot live these experiences, thus limiting the depth of this interpretative layer. The prompt describes a hollow feeling when content is understood to be generated. This hollowness arises from the absence of perceived stakes. For a human artist, creation often involves vulnerability, risk, and a personal investment that can lead to profound emotional or even professional consequences. For an AI, there are no stakes, there is only computation. This lack of perceived consequence or personal cost drains the work of a certain gravitas. The aesthetic achievement might be present, but the underlying narrative of human struggle, which often confers meaning and weight, is conspicuously missing. This absence creates the void. The sheer scale at which generative AI can produce content also impacts perceived value. Human creation is inherently limited by individual time, energy, and capacity. This scarcity contributes to its appreciation. AI, conversely, can produce an effectively infinite volume of text, images, or music. This abundance risks diluting the perceived value of any single piece. If a masterpiece can be generated on demand, its exceptionality might be called into question. Economically, mass production often depresses prices and perceived uniqueness. The same principle may apply to creative works, leading to a devaluation of content simply due to its unlimited availability. While an LLM can generate text that is technically original in its specific combination of words, it lacks originality in the human sense of novel insight, unique experience, or groundbreaking conceptualization. Its output is a sophisticated pastiche, a statistical recombination of existing human-created data. There is no personal perspective, no genuine first-time experiencing an idea. This fundamental difference means that even the most innovative AI-generated narrative carries the faint echo of its training data, rather than the sharp, distinct voice of an individual consciousness. The illusion of originality is effective, but it remains an illusion for many discerning consumers. The rise of AI authorship also intertwines with significant ethical considerations. Questions of copyright, intellectual property, and fair compensation for original human creators become paramount. If an AI generates fiction based on ingesting millions of copyrighted works, where does the ownership or inspiration truly lie? When a reader picks up a book, they implicitly enter into a contract with the author. This contract assumes a shared humanity, an exchange of ideas and emotions from one conscious mind to another. The reader grants the author a certain authority and trusts in their intentionality. With LLM-authored fiction, this contract is fundamentally altered. The author is not a sentient being, and the intentionality is algorithmic, not existential. This shift in the foundational relationship can disrupt the immersive experience and lead to a sense of intellectual and emotional dissatisfaction, even if the prose itself is flawless. The unwritten rules are broken. The distinction between human craftsmanship and AI computation highlights the core difference in value perception. Human craftsmanship involves years of dedication, trial and error, personal investment, and the unique imprint of an individual's hand and mind. It values the process as much as the product. Computation, by contrast, prioritizes efficiency, optimization, and scalable output. While it can mimic intricate designs, it lacks the narrative of human striving. Our brains are hardwired to appreciate the story of human effort and the uniqueness it produces, a narrative absent in even the most sophisticated algorithmic creation. This is a fundamental trade-off. As AI-generated content proliferates, we may see the emergence of verified human labels or certifications in creative industries. This would signify that a piece of content, whether a novel, a song, or a painting, was demonstrably created by a human being without significant AI assistance. Such a label would not be a mark of superiority in terms of objective quality, but rather an assurance of human origin, a premium attribute in itself. This development would formalize the authenticity bias, turning it into a marketable feature. Consumers, seeking that connection, may actively filter for human-made content, driving a new segment of the creative economy. Our capacity for empathy is a cornerstone of human experience and a primary driver of our engagement with narrative. When we read a human-authored story, we activate neural pathways associated with understanding other minds. We project ourselves into the character's shoes, and by extension, into the author's creative process. This empathetic connection is central to the transformative power of storytelling. An AI, lacking consciousness and empathy, cannot truly engage in this empathetic loop. It provides words, but not the empathetic bridge. This fundamental difference in how our brains process human versus machine output explains the depth of the authenticity bias. The authenticity bias has profound implications for institutions like literary awards. Would an AI-authored novel ever be considered for a major prize such as the Pulitzer or the Booker? The criteria for these awards often implicitly, if not explicitly, value human insight, originality of thought, and the author's unique voice. These are qualities intrinsically tied to consciousness and lived experience. While an AI could technically generate a novel that meets stylistic and thematic requirements, the foundational premise of human authorship and the accompanying narrative of struggle and triumph would likely preclude it from genuine consideration. The awards are for human achievement. Paradoxically, human art is often valued for its imperfections. The slight wobble in a hand-drawn line, the unexpected chord change, the character flaw that makes a protagonist relatable, these elements convey humanity, vulnerability, and authenticity. AI, by design, strives for perfection and optimization, often eliminating what it deems errors. This pursuit of flawlessness can, ironically, make AI-generated content feel sterile or soulless. The perfect output might lack the idiosyncratic charm and genuine expressiveness that arises from human limitations and unique artistic choices. Perfection, in this context, can be detrimental to perceived depth. In a future saturated with AI-generated content, human ingenuity, creativity, and perspective might become even more highly valued, precisely because they are scarce. The ability to conceive of something truly novel, born from unique personal experience and consciousness, will be a distinguishing factor. This could lead to a flight to authenticity, where consumers actively seek out and pay a premium for works that are unequivocally human-made. The proliferation of AI may inadvertently elevate the status of genuine human artistry, transforming it from a common expectation into a rare and precious commodity. Scarcity often drives value, and human-made creativity will be scarce. Roland Barthes' seminal essay The Death of the Author argued that the reader, not the author, is the primary locus of meaning in a text. However, the advent of AI challenges this premise in unexpected ways. If the author is not even a conscious entity, does the concept of a human reader-driven meaning still hold the same weight? Paradoxically, the perceived death of the human author in the AI era may lead to a renewed emphasis on authorship, as readers actively seek out human creators to fulfill their innate desire for connection. The author's identity, far from dying, might become more critical than ever. The widespread adoption of AI in content creation could have significant economic repercussions for human artists and writers. As the supply of AI-generated content increases exponentially, the market price for generic or formulaic creative works may plummet. This race to the bottom could disproportionately affect emerging artists or those who rely on high-volume, lower-tier content creation. The only way to command a premium might be through explicit, verifiable human authorship, driving artists towards highly distinctive, personal, or niche creations. The economic value of the human touch will become a crucial differentiator in a saturated market. At its core, art is often seen as a form of personal connection, a way for one individual to communicate an experience or idea to another. Whether it's the specific brushstrokes of a painting, the particular phrasing in a poem, or the melody of a song, these elements serve as conduits for human expression. And AI, by its very nature, interrupts this direct channel. It offers a simulation of expression, a technically perfect echo, but lacks the genuine originating consciousness. This break in the personal connection is arguably the most significant factor contributing to the authenticity bias. We seek hearts and minds, not just data models. Ultimately, our engagement with creative works, whether human or machine-generated, is a choice. We can choose to judge content purely on its aesthetic merits, divorced from its origin. Or, we can acknowledge the inherent human desire for connection, meaning, and authenticity. The evidence suggests that most people, consciously or unconsciously, opt for the latter. We are hardwired to seek out the human element, and to assign greater value to that which carries the trace of another consciousness. This is not a flaw in our judgment, it is a feature of our humanity, reflecting our deepest needs for empathy and shared experience. It's a preference, not a prejudice. This authenticity bias extends beyond creative fiction into realms like news and information. Reports generated by AI, even if factually accurate, often carry less perceived authority and trustworthiness than those authored by human journalists. The absence of a discernible human perspective, editorial judgment, or the potential for accountability diminishes public confidence. We rely on the implicit narrative of human journalistic integrity and ethical decision-making. If we cannot be certain of the human hand behind the information, our default stance shifts to skepticism, regardless of the content's objective veracity. This has profound implications for trust in media. We are witnessing the emergence of an authenticity economy where the provenance of creation is a key differentiator and a source of significant value. From farm-to-table dining to handmade crafts and indie music, consumers are increasingly seeking out products and experiences with clear, human-centric origin stories. AI's rise will only accelerate this trend, making verifiable human authorship a luxury and a mark of distinction across various sectors. This is not simply a romantic notion, it is an economic reality driven by deep-seated psychological needs. Brands and creators who can genuinely connect their work to human stories will thrive. In response to the proliferation of machine-generated content, there will be an imperative to actively reclaim and celebrate the human narrative in creative work. This means not just identifying human authorship, but emphasizing the unique processes, struggles, and inspirations that define it. It's about consciously appreciating the imperfect, the idiosyncratic, and the deeply personal. For creators, this means leaning into what AI cannot replicate: genuine emotion, lived experience, and an inimitable voice. The future of human creativity might lie not in competing with AI on efficiency, but in doubling down on its inherent, irreplaceable humanity. The value we assign to fiction, or any creative work, is not solely determined by its manifest qualities. There is an unseen variable, the story of its maker. Whether that story is one of human struggle, passion, and consciousness, or one of algorithmic computation and data synthesis, it fundamentally alters our perception. The identical words or images will land differently, resonate with varying depths, and feel either profound or hollow, based not on what they are, but on where we believe they came from. Our authenticity bias is not a flaw, it is a testament to our profound need for human connection, even in the abstract world of art.